What's going on, everybody? Kalip's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G and the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2021. Now keep in mind, this is last year's model of the Moto G Stylus 5G. I do also have the predecessor, which I will be comparing to this phone as well. But again, this phone in this video is the Moto G Stylus 5G 2021 that came out last year. Now that being said, if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we're getting a 6.7-inch 120Hz Super AMOLED Plus display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 392, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. With the Moto G Stylus 5G 2021, we're getting a 6.8-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 386, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. So both of these phones do have really good displays, but I would say the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G has a couple significant advantages. First of all, with the display technology, a Super AMOLED Plus display is going to be a lot better quality than an IPS LCD. The colors are going to look a little bit better, and the viewing angles are especially going to be really good on this phone. So if you're outside in the sun, for example, the A73 5G is going to be a lot easier to see than the Moto G Stylus 5G. In addition to this, with a 120Hz display, the movement on the screen with the A73 5G is going to be a little bit faster and smoother. You probably can't tell a whole lot in this video, but when you're doing something with motion on the screen, like watching videos, playing games, that kind of thing, or even just using the phone in general, having a higher refresh rate is going to give you a better experience and make it feel a little bit more premium. But then on the other hand, with the Moto G Stylus 5G, this display is really not bad either. We're still getting a 1080p resolution, really nice looking image, and this phone is a little bit larger at 6.8 inches versus 6.7 inches. Now for storage, both phones are getting 128GB of internal storage. Keep in mind there are several other variants of them, but again, in this video, these two phones do have 128GB. So that's definitely a good amount of storage. Sure, if you're a power user, if you have something like 100GB worth of apps, then you're probably going to want to go with 256 at least. But for the average user, I would say 128 is perfectly fine. And remember, both of these phones also do have microSD card expansion, and this is great if you want to offload photos and videos, for example. Now for security features, both phones do have fingerprint scanners. With the A73 5G, it's right here in the display. Definitely a nice premium looking spot for it. And with the Moto G Stylus 5G, it's right here on the back. And in addition to the fingerprint scanners, both phones have face unlock as well. But starting with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, let's go ahead and give these fingerprint scanners a try and see how well they work. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And moving on to the Moto G Stylus 5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So both fingerprint scanners were real fast and responsive, no issues whatsoever. And remember, again, both phones do have face unlock, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups, with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we got a hole punch design for the front facing camera, and this camera is 32 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a full quad camera setup with a 108 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 5 megapixel macro camera, and a 5 megapixel depth sensing camera. For video, this phone can record in up to 4K at 30 frames per second in both the rear and front cameras, so definitely good there. And then for the Moto G Stylus 5G, we got another hole punch for the front facing camera. This camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 48 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 5 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So as far as features go, these phones have pretty much everything: macro camera, ultra wide camera, all that kind of stuff. So if you're taking a lot of photos and you want a wider variety of features, you're not going to go wrong with either of these phones. Now that being said, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G does have a significant advantage as far as quality goes. With a 108 megapixel camera versus a 48 megapixel camera, this is definitely going to make a difference. Now that being said, keep in mind that megapixels aren't everything in every situation. If you're comparing the A73 5G, for example, to something like, say, a Google Pixel 6a, that phone only has a 12.2 megapixel camera versus a 108 megapixel camera, but at the same time, the Google Pixel 6a, being an entry-level flagship phone, is going to have a much more powerful sensor, and in general still will take better photos than the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G. But in this case, since these are both mid-range phones, and they're really sort of around the same price range, it's safe to say the 108 megapixel camera in the A73 5G is going to have a significant advantage over the 48 megapixel camera in the Moto G Stylus 5G. In addition to this, when it comes to video, the Moto G Stylus 5G can only record in 1080p 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, while again the A73 5G can record in 4K. So overall, I would say if you're taking a lot of photos and videos, the A73 5G will have a huge advantage. But that being said, the Moto G Stylus 5G really isn't bad. So if you're just taking a couple photos every now and then, you're still not going to go wrong with the Moto G Stylus 5G. Now, as far as RAM and processor go, with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we're getting 8GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 778G 5G processor. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 480 5G processor. Now, keep in mind, with the Moto G Stylus 5G specifically, this is the Cricket version of the phone, and again, it does have 4GB of RAM, but if you get it factory unlocked, it will have 6GB instead. Now, that being said, I did run Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both of these phones, and with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we're getting a single core score of 773 and a multi-core score of 2888. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting a single core score of 502 and a multi-core score of 1662. So between the two, clearly the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G is much more powerful, and if you're going to be on your phone a lot or maybe doing higher performance activities like mobile gaming for example, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G will definitely be a much better choice. But if you're just doing more basic activities like web browsing, social media, stuff like that, maybe streaming the odd video here and there, the Moto G Stylus 5G will be perfectly fine. But I will say one thing to think about is that with the Moto G Stylus 5G, although this phone isn't really slow, I want to say the vast majority of modern mid-range phones are a little bit faster than this. So again, if performance is really a priority for you, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G will have a huge advantage. But if you just want something that works and you're really not going to be doing a whole lot with your phone, then the Moto G Stylus 5G will be perfectly fine. Now, both of these phones do have 5000 mAh batteries, but the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G supports 25W fast charging, and the Moto G Stylus 5G only supports 10W fast charging. Now, this is really not going to matter for everyone. I don't know how many people out there actually use a fast charger, but if you do, keep this in mind, because if that is important to you, then the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G will have an advantage. Otherwise, both phones do have really large batteries, and they're both going to get great battery life and longevity. Another thing to keep in mind is that the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G has NFC, and the Moto G Stylus 5G doesn't. So if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, you can do that with the A73 5G, but you can't with the Moto G Stylus 5G. On the other hand, the Moto G Stylus 5G does have a stylus, whereas obviously the A73 5G doesn't. So if you want that feature, definitely keep this in mind as well. In general, the stylus on this phone isn't really amazing or anything, but it does get the job done. If you want to do stuff like handwritten notes and all that kind of thing, you can do that on this phone, or maybe navigating through the device. But if you want to actually draw or anything like that, you will have to get a higher end device. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, in almost every way, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G will be the better device here. Despite the Moto G Stylus 5G being a little bit larger, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G has a much better quality display with a higher refresh rate as well. It also has a better camera setup in general and can record 4K videos, and it has a faster processor with much better performance. But that being said, despite the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G being the better device, it's really still not for everyone. And if you're just looking for a solid phone that works, you don't need the best performance, best camera, or even the best display, but you want everything to be at least decently good. In that situation, the Moto G Stylus 5G is still going to be a great choice. Now again, if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability, because this is always changing. But this concludes my comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G and the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2021. If you enjoyed the video and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipa's Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next one.